WMNF. Tell us a little bit about your childhood before there was the suppression by the Nazis.
We were an Austrian family. My great-grandparents were in Austria, and we were of course Jewish, but the great-grandparents were of course Orthodox. But generally in Austria and Germany, the Jewish people were quite assimilated. They mixed in general circles. I went to an ordinary school. We went to synagogue, to high holidays, but that was about it. But at school, and this is very important, you had to have religious education. That was compulsory. Well, Austria is a Catholic country, and we had, most children were of course Catholic. We had about 7 or 8 Jewish children in our class, and we were taken out 3 times a week for an hour, taken in another classroom, and we had Jewish education. And we had excellent teachers, and we became very enthusiastic about our Jewish history. And so we sort of converted our parents to go back to the tradition. We wanted all the festivals to be kept, Purim and Pesach and Hanukkah and all that. And so we became, through teaching, really more Orthodox. And I was very happy. We had a big family, extended family, many cousins, and I was a real tomboy. My father too was very adventurous, and he was one of the first people who had a car, and he took us up the mountain road. You know, my mother sat in the back screaming at everything. I loved it. Go on, Dad, go on, more beds and so on. But all this collapsed as soon as the Nazis came in. It didn't even a day passed when Jewish people were attacked immediately. As I said, people knew who were Jewish because you went to Jewish, you were taken out of your school. My best friend was actually a little Catholic girl. On the way home, I usually went to pop into her and play with her. As soon as the Nazis came, I carried on going to her home. When the mother saw me, she said, "You're not welcome here anymore," and she slapped the door in my face. I was 9 years old. I went home, I cried. I said to my mother, "I don't understand. We didn't have a quarrel. Why is this?" And my mother said, "Well, this is how life for Jewish people will be from now on." My brother, who was 3 years older, he went to school. He was attacked by his own friends, and the teachers just stood there and watched it happening. And it was approved of if you attacked a Jewish person. And well, we were lucky. My father had connections in Holland. He had a shoe factory which he had inherited from his father, and he had exported to Holland. And so he knew factories and so on. And he actually immediately left, saying he would find somewhere for us to live, and he would try to get us out then. By the time he had something for us, there was no way anymore to get out and to get in. And this was really the terrible thing why all this happened, because in 1938, 39, there was already, of course, from Germany, many Jewish people had left already, but by that time, nobody really wanted any more Jewish people. And Hitler realized that. President Roosevelt had a conference in Evian in France, where all the European countries were assembled, and the conference was to find out how many Jewish people all those countries wanted to take in. And it was practically nothing. Canada was even one of the worst. There's a book came out, "One is even too many." And Hitler knew, of course, about the conference, and he realized the world doesn't care about Jewish people. And I always tell a story of proof of this. My husband's family came from Munich. This was a very center of Nazism. Hitler was very, very often there. My husband, as a young boy, often saw Hitler. And his father was arrested in 1933, only because he dealt in hops, you know, where you make beer. Munich is very famous for that. Lots of big beer drinkers. And sold it to the manufacturers, and some owed him money, so they denounced him, and he was arrested. He was an innocent person, and he was sent to Dachau. And after 3 years, when he was nearly to death, they didn't kill people, but hard labor, very little food, and he got ill actually. But they released him after 3 years with the condition that within 6 weeks he leaves the country with his family. They had no connections, they were not particularly rich, and the mother went to consul everywhere, couldn't get a visa anywhere. Eventually the English consul in Munich heard about this case, and he gave him a visa for Palestine, because the British restricted the emigration to Palestine very much. But this is proof that Hitler just wanted to get rid of the Jews.
But you went from Vienna to Brussels.
To Brussels. Well,
that was tough for you because you didn't speak French.
Not a word, of course.
As
a nine-year-old, we hadn't learned French. We didn't travel to the French country, so I didn't know anything. And the refugees at the time was quite something unknown and something unwanted. So I was put in the back of the class. Nobody took any notice of me. And I was a very lively social child, but I lost all my confidence, became shy, awkward. And after a few days there was a dictation. The teacher said, just write. I had no clue, of course, what I was writing. And the next day she wrote my work back. Every word was underlined in red. It was all wrong. And she showed it to the class, what a stupid child I was. You can imagine how I felt. And so I was very, very unhappy. And my father was in Holland, my mother and my brother, we were in Brussels in a little boarding house. It was really terrible. We had very, very little money. We were like enemies. And then the war started in 1939. My father tried desperately to get a visa for us to come to Holland. Eventually we got this in February 1940, and we settled in Amsterdam temporarily with 3 months. And we moved on to a big square. If ever you go to Amsterdam to visit the Anne Frank, go to the Merwedeplein. It still looks like it used to be, only I've got photos later when we come outside, I'll show you. There were 2 cars on this whole square. Now there's no room anymore for children to play, all full of cars. But at that time there was a big open square, and the first high building, 9 floors, a skyscraper, and all the children went there after school to play. And one day a little girl came to me and introduced herself and said her name was Anne Frank. Her family comes from Germany, and she took me to her apartment, which was opposite ours, and I met her father, mother, and sister. And we became friends for 2 years.
How old were you and how old was she?
We were 11 years old at the time, both 11. She's just 1 month, she was 1 month younger than me. I was born in May and she in June.
You said she was more serious, though, than for her age, correct?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't even say serious, but she was quite mature in a way. And I was really very, very childish. And I used to play. Well, so much. Yeah, but I loved to play marbles. I had a bag of marbles, and that was very popular at the time. And everybody who had another bag, I challenged them to play marbles. Anna didn't do that. That was too boyish and too childish for her. But we skipped together, and she always wanted to have a lot of people around her. She was a bit of a show-off. She wanted to tell stories. At school, she was called Mrs. Quack Quack because she never stopped talking. Very often she had to stay behind to write lines. I'm not going to talk so much in class, but they didn't really help. And she was, at 11, already very interested in boys. And I had an older brother, when she heard that, her eyes grew very big, and she said, well, I have only a sister, you're so lucky. But anyway, you know, for 2 years we were friends.
Okay, you were 11 through 13. Did you talk about the war and being Jewish and what was happening, or did you was it put out of your mind?
No, well, certainly not before the Nazis came in. We didn't talk about anything. The Dutch were very friendly. They all said, don't worry about anything. We love our Jewish population. They had taken in many Sephardic Jews when they were thrown out of Spain and Portugal. And as well, you know, they say anti-Semitism in Germany was because all the Jews were rich. Well, that wasn't true at all. There were rich Jews like everywhere else, but as well many, many poor Jews. And in Amsterdam especially, there were a lot of barrel boys. They had the market on a Sunday, and they had a lot of Jewish humor, and the Dutch population went especially to have jokes and hear funny stories, and it was an outing. And so, you know, it was part of the way of life in Amsterdam to go to the Jewish market and have fun there. And
Then the Nazis.
in May 1940, so after we were there 3 months, one night we heard aeroplanes and guns, and we looked out and we saw searchlights, and we put on the radio, and it said, terrible news, the Germans are trying to invade our country, but don't worry, we are going to fight them. Well, little did the Dutch know, with their little army against this mighty German invasion, there was no way. There was a 5-day war. The Dutch Queen escaped first to England and then to Canada, and the Dutch felt actually let down through that. But you know, at that time, you had to make quick choices. Some choices were good, some choices were bad. The Belgian king stayed, but he had to cooperate with the Germans, and after the war he had to abdicate because the population said he was a traitor. The Dutch queen was reinstated, and she did a lot of help from abroad. So it was really very, very difficult to make right decisions.
When the Germans finally came in, how quickly did you go into hiding, like Anne Frank's family went into hiding? Was it like overnight?
No, it took 2 years, because not like in Austria, the population, when we had to wear the yellow star, for instance, many Dutch people started to wear the star. When they started to arrest Dutch boys and men, Jewish boys and men, there was a general strike, the February strike, and you know, they really tried to stand up against it, but they really hadn't a chance. The Germans, after the strike, for instance, they said, if you're not going to go to work immediately, we're going to take hostages from the streets, only innocent people, and we're going to shoot them. So, of course, they went to work. But, you know, we felt we were not let down. We had help. And, of course, like in all the occupied countries, there was a big resistance movement. Many Dutch people joined the resistance, meaning they shot particularly bad Nazis, they blew up trains, they printed ration cards, but as well, later, they helped Jewish people to hide. So what happened in 1942, so after 2 years living in fear, many, many young boys and men got a call-up notice to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. They never called the things what they really meant, like the final solution that could be anything, or resettling. And so many, many parents thought, well, the Germans need young people who can work in their factories, all the German men are in the army, and many, unfortunately, many parents sent their youngsters, which they were not at all sent to Germany. They work in factories, they were sent to Mauthausen. Have you heard of this camp? An Austrian camp. And that was actually one of the biggest camps which the American army liberated later, because they were in the south in Austria. And it was a horrific death camp. There were stone cliffs and those young people were just thrown down from the cliff. Of course, one didn't know that at the time. We only heard of that after the war. And so my brother, who was 16, and Anna's sister Margot, same age, got as well those call-up notices. And our parents decided they wouldn't send their children, but we would go into hiding.
So you found a family that took you. You and Anne went to different places together.
Well, Anne with 7 other people went into Otto Frank's office. I'm sure a lot of you have been to see the house, and you have seen a film or a play or read her diary, and she describes actually very, very clearly how life was in hiding for that family. But in our case, it was quite different. We had to depend on strangers, really, who were going to help Jewish people. And houses in apartments in Amsterdam are not big. People don't live in houses, but in quite small apartments, because there's not much space. You know, it's all, most of the land is under sea level, and so there's not really a lot of land available to build. And so we had to split up again. My mother and me went to one hiding place, and my father and brother to a different place.
And the Nazis would come and look for Jews at these various houses.
They knew that they called up 10,000 people, only 5,000 came, and they really wanted to catch every Jew. So at night they came with trucks, knocked on doors, and you know, even the Dutch non-Jews had no rights. If a German came and knocked on your door, say, I want to search your house, you have to let them in. If you fancied something, a picture, a candlestick, a silver frame, he took it, you couldn't say anything. And they came in and searched the houses, the apartments. So the people from the resistance, after we had been there, looked over their apartment and said, well, we are going to build a false partition here, a wall there, or in a cupboard something, or even under the floorboard. And at night when they came, we quickly went in there.
You had some close encounters as they actually came to the house.
Many, many times they came. And, you know, it was very, very frightening, because the hiding place was good, but not 100% safe. If they really would have looked properly, they could have found people. And there was rumors going, for instance, they always came at night in another apartment. They felt the beds, which were still warm, so they realized people were hiding there. So they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And everybody was arrested, not just the Jewish people, the people who helped Jews. And so people became scared and said, well, you have to move. And so we moved about 6-7 times to different places.
What did you do to occupy your day?
Well, as I said before, I was an outdoor child. My mother always said I'm a late developer. I didn't like reading or writing like Anne. And she tried to teach me a little bit, because I didn't want to lose more of my school. And she said, well, and you know, at the time, in 42, America had been already in the war. People said, well, when we went into hiding in the summer, my father said, just a few months. Sure, by the end of the year, the war will be finished. So, and it dragged on 6 years. And, you know, nobody really expected it would last that long. Especially when America came in, you know, that was great hope was then. But
and then you would get to your 15th birthday.
Yeah. And
Tell
that
us about
was,
that day.
my father and brother had to move as well. The woman where they were staying in the country started to blackmail them for more money. And after 2 years in hiding, our money started to run out. And my father phoned my mother and said, please find us a different place, because we can't stay here any longer. Thank you. And so, as I said, it became very difficult. Even Dutch young men at that time in 44 were arrested in the street and taken to Germany really to work in factories. And of course they didn't want to go, so they went into hiding. So hiding places became a premium. It was very difficult to find safe places. And eventually a Dutch nurse came forward and said she knows a safe house. But it turned out she was a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis and just offered this safe house where the Nazis came then and